Yo everybody, what's going on? This is Keegan from Kman Reviews. If you enjoyed this review, make sure you hit that like and the subscribe button. And if you have any opinions at all that you would like to share, make sure to leave them down in the comment section. C418, 148. C418 is the alias of German producer and sound designer Daniel Rosenfeld, an artist who, prior to this request, I assumed was just the guy who curated and masterminded the Minecraft soundtrack, but much to my surprise, the guy has a wealth of material to his name, some including other video game soundtracks, and others actually being more unique, more personal content. And the latter is the theme of this album, which was requested by a fellow YouTuber, the album being 148, released in 2015. I had a bit of worry going into this album for two reasons. One, it's 19 tracks long, and a lot of the songs in here are rather lengthy. The entire album clocks in at just under 2 hours, so this is going to be a longer review, as I'm sure you guys can tell. And two, being this kind of progressive house, IDM, ambient sort of stuff is not my bread and butter at all when it comes to reviews. But I am never one to shy away from a journey down a newer musical avenue, especially for a deeper, in-depth review like this, so let's just dive right in. What are my thoughts on 148? Let's find out as I review this album track by track. Since I couldn't find if there were any singles, we will just start at the top of the track list, with that being the opener, Semantic Satiation, which kicks off the album almost like ASMR. The slow, prominent, staticky crackles really stab through headphones. I can definitely see that being a comforting sensation for someone who enjoys that kind of ASMR. After a bit, the sandy clinking of the hi-hat breaks through, assisted by some light, pillowy humming, and a plunky synth melody that serves as an amazing build-up to the vocals, which are very hypnotizing. For those who don't know, semantic satiation is a legitimate phenomenon. It's that whole feeling of you hear a word or a phrase so many times that it intrinsically loses all meaning for a brief period. And that's all the lyrics to this song are. It's just the same 8 words repeated over and over again for 5 minutes. Over time, the plunky synth evolves and begins to swallow everything else gradually a few times, and at the end of the song, it just fades out. A roller coaster of a track, pretty satisfying, and I'd say a tantalizing opener as well. Very good. Septic Shock transitions very well from the opening track, instantly reintroducing that same bubbly synth, but not before transforming into this deeper, funky beat with rapid punches of bass and snaps. Reminds me of a Billie Eilish type beat, but before Billie was even an established artist. I love how smoothly the synth gets incorporated into the beat, instantly helping the song feel much more fresh and bright. Over the 3.5 minutes, the track keeps getting built up, more synths, light cymbal taps, getting richer and more volumetric. The lyrics are the exact same as Semantic Satiation, but at times they almost come off as warbly pitched gibberish, clearly much more focused on this beat, which I absolutely love, plus it even features a more fluid transition into the next song. This one's great. Seismic Stratigraphy, the final track on this supposed house ballad trilogy, and really seems like the apotheosis of this trilogy. It's the longest at 7.5 minutes, it's also the most substantial, kicking off with the same repetition that Semantic Satiation had, although not to such a high degree, repeating multiple phrases, each feeling very pessimistic over this cyclic synth rhythm. After that opening minute ensues, we get a gentle, spacious ambience with light snaps, and then the same percussion from Septic Shock comes back in, although without the bass in between, but the percussion still feels heavy in its hits. But the synth does slide back in not long after, as the percussion slowly gets a bit more groovy, helping to meld a clean electronic bop. Which actually goes on for a decent while as Daniel sings several different lines, all seemingly tying back to this theme of monotonous work life, going through the ceaseless motions of a job all day, every day, and never really gaining anything out of it. All culminating in the remarkably philosophical closing lyrics, "Life is a historical illusion, life is a hysterical delusion." As these lyrics are repeated, the grooviness vanishes, leading into a mesmerizing synth melody that gets louder and louder, whisking the lyrics away first, followed by the song in a sudden end. This trilogy is a phenomenal way to open up an album. Get the listener really invested in the sound, both upbeat and tranquil, while also hiding a darker, more indicative theme in the lyrics. Love it. Droopy Remembers, which is actually a remix track of the last 2 songs from the Minecraft Volume Alpha soundtrack, revitalized for this album here, and I'd say it combines the 2 songs very well. It also helps to make them feel so much more. Where the original songs are much more minimal, this version takes both of those instrumentals and supplements them with the piercing synths and vibey snare prevalent on the opening trilogy. And I do really love the lush breakdown about a minute in. It's very compact yet delicate in its execution, and when the wavering synth melody comes in for a funky jam for the rest of the song, letting the robotic vocals sing the lyrics of Droopy Likes Your Face, it's so easy to just get washed up in this song. Great track. Kompass featuring Disaster Piece is actually one of the many purely instrumental cuts on the album, and is actually another remix of Disaster Piece's own song called Kompass, although this one is well over twice as long. Where the original had a lot more standard production, this remix here feels very full, vibrant, and at times organic. The blaring percussion is a nice touch, the string work is immaculate, and it just helps to make the track feel fuller and almost triumphant. After the halfway mark, we get a plucky breakdown with some muted snare slaps, maintaining that slow timbre for a good chunk of the song until the explosion of drums and synths returns for the final minute of the song. It soars, it flies, it transitions into the next track effortlessly. It's a magnificent song and an album highlight for sure. 185 featuring Bayon, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it, but it's also a purely instrumental song and is also the longest song on the album, just barely being short of 10 minutes. And right away, as soon as I hear that pounding bass drum and shaker, I know I'm in for a treat. It slowly starts evolving with a funky synth bass line and some extra hollow, almost tropical percussive elements, and a sprawling, colorful sky of synths that actually regress into a more heartfelt melody with impactful piano and shining strings before turning back into a punchy, bass-heavy bop. Which is kind of where the track stays for the rest of its runtime, only really changing with some additional synth flourishes aside from morphing into a lighter jam for the final leg. But other than that, it's just a consistent and lengthy bop. I really like this one. Jimtention featuring Big Giant Circles is another remix of a Big Giant Circles song called A Rose in the Field, which I actually adore that song. I love how open and carefree that one feels, much like A Rose in a Field, so I was curious how this remix would sound, especially with it being over twice as long. And it opens up in about the same fashion. The plunky synth melody is great, but the soaring, shrill synth has a bit of an echo behind it, which only amplifies the vastness of this song. That sprawling ambience leads the tune for the first 2 minutes as some shimmering chimes allow the track to evaporate out, wallowing in silence for a bit as the beat slowly comes back in on a soft build-up that reminds me of a song from like Geometry Dash. But then this groovy synth bass and snare comes in, completely transforming the vibe of the song from gorgeous to banger. But then after about a minute of that, it drops back down again to that same build-up tone, but this time with a muted presence of the bass, then changes again with a bubbly poppy synth with some more grimy synths and hissing percussion, turning into squeaky synths before a deep isolated drum closes the track out. The song is just full of non-stop rises and falls, additional sonic layers, new vibes altogether. Certainly an album highlight, one of my favorites here. Skinokoibumi 2 featuring Laura Shigihara, another remix of C418's own song Skinokoibumi, which I thought this track was maybe like 5, 7-ish years old at this point and it's getting a remaster. But the original was only 2 years old when this song released, which seems almost like a bit of a lazy rehash to pad out the album. Either way, this remix does what most of the remixes on this album do, make their original tracks more full, grand, and luscious, while also having moments where the track lives up to the house label and becomes a bit boppy as well. I love the light synth melody that sounds like a vibraphone. It's very sweet and simple, plus the drum work is also very solid, but I feel like when it comes down to when the vocals enter, this one presents a bit of a disconnect, and kind of feels like when artists remix emotionally potent songs to give them a poppier edge, and just like that, the soul of the song is kind of ripped out. The original track has amazing piano work, reserved percussion, and delicate ambience, really benefiting Laura's angelic, breathy voice. Hearing the drop, the subsequent snare, and heavy synth layers on this one, it almost gets to the point where her voice gets masked by the beat and just doesn't work in the same way for me. Not my favorite at all, gotta pass on this one, I'll just stick to the original. Friend is one of the most fleshed out songs on the album, and I enjoy every second of it. Such a fun, chiptune-inspired electro-pop jam. The jumpy, peppy synth melody scattered across the tune is very uplifting. Daniel's vocals undergo a whole host of vocal effects, robotic, chipmunked, echoed, the whole 9 yards, and it's very entertaining how spasmodic it jumps between one and another. Plus, the snare remains for the majority of the tune, solidifying the groove, and the bass on the verses is so infectious in its warm, atmospheric presence. As a result of it being a more traditional song, however, it doesn't really go anywhere aside from that. Very stagnant and consistent, but I think after the wild, oscillating journey the album has led me through, it's nice to hear something a bit easier to grasp. Really enjoyed the song. Veerton begins this consecutive 3-track run as C418 remixing Minecraft songs into this album. All 3 are remixes from the Volume Beta soundtrack, not the Alpha one that everyone knows. This one specifically is of Veerton, which is a gorgeous ambient track. Daniel said he wanted to make these songs danceable and less chill, which instantly gave me flashbacks to the dancier quality of skinokoibumi 2, and also gave me feelings that this just kind of felt like padding a bit, and you can tell right away from the serene, pulsating ambience this definitely could have fit right at home in Minecraft. It's almost a bit haunting, but I do really like the reverberating percussion. It almost feels like tapping on a steel drum, which then becomes a soft, vibey beat with light drum work that slowly, and I mean slowly, begins to evolve in the same way that a lot of the tracks on this album have so far. And that's really all the track does aside from introduce one brief piano-led breakdown. It's one of the more uninteresting and overly repetitive songs on the album, and I feel like with the 7 minutes and 40 seconds presented here, there could have been a lot more done. Pass. Aria Economy, which is a remix of Aria Math, another amazing track with a majestic build-up, but it's a very fitting next song, transitioning well and carrying over the same jaunty tropical percussion that was on Veerton. And then we kind of get a similar case here, almost like these two songs could have easily been compounded into one, as the bassy kick drum kicks in, painting the way for this simple yet intoxicating house beat to come through, with this wall of synth shining brighter and brighter over 2 minutes. After that, the bulk of the instrumental goes into hiding briefly, letting the track build up a second time, with the drum and synth being the most in-your-face it's been on the entire album. And then this second house beat comes in, and after that, the cycle repeats, sometimes with a harder kick, sometimes with a denser synth. It's certainly more wavy and kinetic than Veerton, and out of this little trilogy of remix songs, this is definitely my favorite. Biome Party, which is a remix of Biome Fest, closing out this streak of remixes, and out of all of them so far, this might just be the most offensive to the original in my opinion. Biome Fest is a beautiful song with a magnetizing synthetic atmosphere, such a gorgeous listen, so to hear it turned into a dense, almost club-ready electronic song is certainly a jarring twist, and a complete 180 from what made the original so special. The song does have its moments though, some of the breakdowns are pretty potent, the overall mixing and sound of the song is pretty alright. Not the most memorable thing on the album, but it's certainly not poor at all, but I don't know, with understanding the context that this is a remix of an already amazing song, but just overly diluted to be more accessible and upbeat, and plus it also being pretty flat in terms of tonal escalations, much like Veerton, not one I'm really wanting to revisit. 481772 is a track that almost gives me like rap vibes, and it mostly comes down to how the percussion is done, that pounding bass drum, the sheer scale of the synthetic wall looming over it that almost sounds like soaring opulent strings. It actually kind of reminds me of something that Blade could be on. Even in the more subdued moments, the snare has a hearty clap to it. It just makes it something you can uncontrollably nod along to. Probably one of the most aggressive and hard-hitting songs on the album, this track is another one that remains comfortable in its own pace. It doesn't move around all that much, and when it does, it's usually just as a quieter version of the original beat. No real disassembly or metamorphoses at all, aside from at the end when the drum and bass element get enlarged, but it's really just a banger beat, and I like it. Ample Time, which opens up in mesmerizing fashion with the twinkling synth almost giving me the feeling that like I'm ascending into the great unknown. It feels like a monumental opening moment, and not to mention the pulsating, spacious ambience that follows suit, which transforms quickly into a plunky, jumpy beat. The drums are energetic as the foundation slowly becomes more and more galvanized, dropping down to a lone percussive track, building back up again, and following that formula for the entire track. While the song may have its moments where it dips, the tempo and the spark of the song never really go away. Even at its emptiest, the drum will still get you bopping with its rhythmic punches, plus the chipmunk vocals effects may not show up often, but they add an amazing garnish to the song. Very well done here. Habitual Crush is another one of the more developed songs on here, and it opens in a very chilling manner. The crackly, staticky melody continuously rising as Daniel's soft vocals shine, as the synth glows like sunrise breaking through the perpetual twilight. A homely ambience that just seems to whisk me away to a happier place. And when the beat drops with the staccato guitar, strumming, rattling percussion, and tasteful bass and tambourine decoration, it paints a smile on my face every time. It's so simple yet rewarding. Of course, we get some more breakdowns, but I especially love every time the build-up returns, letting this beat get louder and fuller, only enriching that rewarding feeling. Even at the 6 minutes this song is, it's a sunny, intoxicating journey that I wish was longer. Phenomenal song, one of my favorites. Divide by 4 Add 7 is another instrumental, and this one almost gave me like a fusion of dubstep and ambient house vibes. Like the drums crash all across the song, but there's a radiating synth dome all across the track. It's almost like drum and bass, but I feel like for that comparison to be made, the drums would have to be a bit more manic and sharp, and plus the energy here doesn't quite match up to D&B. In fact, it's actually kind of surprising how with all these elements, the track kind of stays firmly in this mid-tempo safe zone. The song certainly has its beautiful moments. I especially like the sugary piano ballad aiding the breakdown around 2.5 minutes, but as a whole, it's mainly just a mellow, vibey song with pepped up percussion. It's nice, but honestly, it was one of the more forgettable moments in this last leg of the album. Round up to the inevitable end, which between this and Divide by 4 Add 7, both 7-minute behemoths at the end of the album, this one is just so much better in every aspect. I love how it takes a whole minute to build up from this tiny percussion and zipping synth, and when it finally drops, it's very similar sonically to Divide by 4 Add 7, but this is much more akin to drum and bass music. It's quicker, it's more brisk, the synths are much more buoyant as well. I love how quickly the intensity plummets down to that same minimalism that was on the opening, then has an even more dramatic build-up to a sporadic second drop with harder bass and an even grander scale. This is an amazing song and serves as a great way to introduce the denouement of this epic record. Beta, the final remix on the album, being of the classic song Sweden from Volume Alpha, and out of all the remixes of C418 originals, this is hands down my favorite. It starts off with the exact same melody, that incredible piano, which actually stays throughout the entire tune, but added with the remix we get a bouncy bass, glistening synths, and soft, easygoing drums. It's basically exactly what I would have wanted in a more dancey remix of that Minecraft song. Unfortunately, there are some times where the synth overpowered that piano cornerstone, which sucks because I think that's what really helps to sell the song. But for a majority of the time, it's in a very audible place, especially for the breakdown 2 minutes through. The piano is still shining front and center while the synthetic onslaught is happening behind it. It's a very striking moment, but I also love how the track softly and elegantly fades away like dust in the wind. Amazing song, another album highlight. And finally, the closer 841 is a trippy closing statement to the album. The overall foundation of the song is very transcendental with its ensconcing synth ambience, but for a majority of the song, that serenity is pretty much countered by some quacking synth melody and buzzingly pitched snoring, what sounds like. After about 2.5 minutes of that, the vibe disperses out, leaving the song to fade away on some more light synth to close the album out. Certainly a decent way to wrap up the record. Overall, much to my surprise, I thoroughly enjoyed this album. Plenty of infectious, sticky highs, a lot of soaring melodies, even some relaxing, vibey beats. Unsurprisingly, I think the album's sheer length is its biggest hindrance, especially how it was padded with old remixes, some of which were not necessary or even memorable in the slightest. I think trim the album down maybe to about 14, 15 tracks and I would have enjoyed it a lot more. But if you've got 2 hours to kill and you just want some enjoyable electronic music to bop along to, this should be the record you play. I'm feeling an 8 out of 10 on this album. Well guys, hope you enjoyed that review. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.